Thank you, all of you, being here. It's very nice to have you all here. And my name is Louise, and I'm a second-year PhD in architecture. What my PhD doing is to look at the housing tenure choices of young graduates in the UK. And however, in this talk, I only focus on the home ownership of young graduates. And I will answer the question. I will explain based on the question of when will you be able to afford a house. There are 4 things I'm going to talk about. The first thing is I will give a definition of who are young graduates and why we care about them so much. And I also will talk about the housing crisis in the UK. The third thing I'm going to say is what kind of housing crisis exactly young graduates are facing. And at the end, how can we help them to can improve housing affordability for them. First of all, young graduates in my research refer to those who aged between 20 to 35 years old and have at least a college degree. And this includes most of the students in Cambridge, like all of us. The young graduates are 6% of the whole population, and it is 35% of the population in our age group. And if we look at the age group like age between 25 to 34, the proportion would be much higher, something like 40 or even 50%, but less than 50%, because most of the people have their first degree at the age of 22 or 23. And why we care about them so much? Because they contribute a lot to the GDP, to the economic growth. We are in an era of knowledge economy, so most of the industry of the technology-intensive industry will contribute a lot to the economic growth in urban areas. And there is a report revealed that the UK leading employers are increasing their graduate vacancies by an impressive 9.1% in 2019. And there's also another report that says that there are 76% of the professional jobs in London are occupied by graduates. And of course, young graduates will take a very important role in the labor market. And in the urban perspective, urban strategy, it's very important to maintain enough young graduates in the city, because there's a report revealed that the number of jobs for workers with higher education qualifications or above will rise from 59% to 68% in this 20 years' time. So it is a big increase. If London wants to compete with the other global cities like New York and Paris, London should attract and maintain more graduates in cities instead of losing them. However, there's evidence shows that there is a big outflow of young residents departing from London. This graph is for the whole population, but this is mainly driven by young graduates because there's evidence shows that graduates are more likely to have higher mobility than non-graduates. We can see that at the age of 20 to 24, many people move into London to receive education. However, after that, there are a big outflow of people from London to the rest of the region. And one of the, especially after the age of 30, and London only have the net inflow of young people aged between 20 to 29. However, over 30 years old, most of them will leave London gradually. And one of the biggest factors which drive this change is the high house prices in London. This graph shows the house prices in big cities increased dramatically in the last 2 decades compared to year 2000. We can see that there are, like in London, compared to the house price in London increased triple than its house price in 2000, and the same the same issue applied to Paris and Toronto and San Francisco and Hong Kong, and with very few exceptions like Milan. And this outliers is Moscow, and this is Athens. But overall, most of the global cities have a high increase in house prices. And if we compare the house prices in big cities to the house prices in other regions, we can see that even though the house prices in other regions also increase a lot, but it's not as dramatically as London. So young graduates who live in London are more likely to suffer from the housing crisis. But you might argue that, like, if you live in London or you work in London, you might have a higher income. However, the income doesn't compensate fully for the high house prices. Here, I'm going to show the housing affordability over time. And housing affordability is measured by years to buy. This is how I calculate years to buy. It is the ratio of median house prices to median earning. If I say it takes 15 years to buy a house, that means you need to pay 15 years of your full salary to buy a house. If this number is over 10, it probably means you need to spend maybe 2/3 of the whole income in your whole life on a house. And most of the people really do not want to do this. And this is a picture of England and Wales. This is London, and east, southeast is the north region, and this one is southwest, East Midland and Wales. And Cambridge is here, this tiny dot. This is the housing affordability in 1998. Probably when your parents want to buy a house is probably somewhere at this time. And we can see that in general, housing it takes only maybe 2 years to buy a house. And even in London, it just takes less than 8 years to buy a house. However, in 2003, the housing affordability worsened at a very large extent. Like in London, it takes over 8 years to buy a house, and most of the region in the south have been worsened to something like 7 years or over 5 years to buy a house. In 2008, almost every part in England and Wales take over 5 years to buy a house, and in regions in the south, it takes over 8 years. In 2013, the situation became a little bit better after the financial crisis in 2008. However, if we see 2018, in almost all the areas here, it's over 10 years old, 10 years to buy a house. This is Cambridge. And this picture excludes the local authorities such as Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea, because they are just too high. They're as high as maybe like 45 years to buy the house. This is incredibly high. And what's the consequences of this evolution of housing affordability? One of the main results is the drop in home ownership. This is the age, and this line indicates the home ownership of your parents or grandparents, and this two line could be the generation of your parents, and this is you, millennial. And at the age of 30, your grandparents might have 15% chances of owning a house, and then this home ownership increased to 63, and then dropped dramatically to only 43. So there is the house prices affect largely on the home ownership. And you might argue that if we have a degree in Cambridge, the home ownership might slightly higher for us. But this is not always the case, since most young graduates are more likely to concentrate in the least affordable areas. This picture illustrates the correlation between share of young graduates and years to buy in local authority districts. And this is the share of, the x-axis is share of graduates and the y-axis is years to buy. And for example, in Cambridge, over 90% of the young people at this age range are graduates. And it takes approximately 13 years to buy a house. And the black circle is the local authorities in London, and the blue circle is in somewhere in South, and the bottom, the circle in green is for the London, the local authorities in North. And this illustrates that if you want to locate the local authority where young graduates more likely to concentrate, how the housing affordability will become worse. And if you fit the data with 3 curves, this curve is for London, this curve is for South, this curve is for the region in North. And this illustrates that in the North, this shows the housing affordability inequality in these 3 areas. Like in the North, the house prices, the housing affordability doesn't worsen to a large extent. However, if you live in the South or London, if you want to locate in the popular places, you are very likely to face less affordable areas. And this graph is years to buy is referred to the whole population. If I use the income for each individual, and this is the picture of who is living in areas where it takes over 15 years to buy a terrace house. Why I use terrace house? Because the detached house and semi-detached house is just too high for young graduates to afford. So to be realistic, so I use the terrace house. Terrace house looks like this. And it shows that this is graduate, this is young non-graduates. And this line means the median income of graduates. So after you graduate, you can expect to earn something like 20,000 a year. This is a takeaway income. And it shows that if the young graduates live in the least affordable area, more likely to earn more than those who live in more affordable areas. However, the opposite is true for non-graduates. For non-graduates, those who who face unaffordability are more likely to have low income. However, and their mean income is even less, but the mean income compared to these two, this one is higher. And so the last question I try to answer is, how can we improve the housing affordability for young graduates? There are 4 possible solutions. The first of all, maybe the first thing we should come to our mind is increase of housing supply, because increased housing supply and it can reduce the house costs. And how to increase housing supply? It can depend on the turnover rate, like more people are going to transact to sell their house, or we can build more houses. However, even though housing supply is a very important solution for decreasing house prices, however, if you only increase housing supply, does not help a lot with the home ownership of young graduates, because their evidence shows that a 50% increase in the number of housing starts compared to the current level for 10 years. It can only improve affordability by 1 point, means from 15 years to 14 years. And the second solution, apart from increasing housing supply, we should also find other solution. The second possible solution could be reduce housing demand. For example, like many elderly owners are occupying their house. They are owning a very large house with many empty rooms, but they don't even need them. But if we consider the second solution, we should be very careful because there might not be enough suitable houses for these elderly people to move, and the transaction cost is high, so they might not have a motivation to move to a smaller house, and most of them have already paid off their mortgage. The third thing is we can have monetary policies. We can decrease the money which for deposit. For example, before the financial crisis in 2008, people we can pay as less as 5% of their housing value. Like if you want to buy a 300,000 house, you can use maybe a deposit of 15,000. Then you can afford the house. However, after the financial crisis, the amount of deposit raised to 20% or even 30%. And this means a lot to young graduates because most of them do not have enough deposit to get into the housing ladder, unless you have a very wealthy parents. And the second thing is to reduce interest rate. If you reduce interest rate, that means you can afford a house with less price. And however, this will it is a very good solution in the short run. However, in the long run, if you reduce interest rates, it will make the house prices in the housing market even higher because people can use less money to buy a house. The fourth thing is a very typical housing policies in the UK is a share ownership. Share ownership means that you can own like 25 to 75% of your house, and the rest of it is owned by a housing association or by the government. And in this case, you can pay less to own a house. However, there is a report shows that if you have share ownership, those people who benefit from share ownership are more likely to be well-off people who already have a good income, and they have share ownership only can help those well-off people to buy larger houses, or they can afford the better houses they want. So what I suggest to do is to have housing policies which targeting at young graduates only. Before we decide what kind of policy we should have for young graduates, we need to know exactly about what can affect their housing decisions. So what affects their decision to own a home? And this required to build a model to understand it better. And there are a few things which these few variables will be controlled in the literature and also in my studies. The first thing is the age, like if you grow older, you're more likely to own. And gender also have an effect, since some of the female are more likely to marry earlier than men, so the home ownership of women are slightly higher than men if they are given that they are at the same age. Ethnicity, there is the gap between white and non-white also is a very highly debated question in most of the literature. Nationality also, like if you are not a UK citizen, you might not want to own a house because you think you might move back to your country after you finish your study. And labor market, at present, the labor market become not very stable. People are more likely to lose their job or become unemployed. So if you do not have a stable job, you are less likely to own. And also, if you have a high income, you're more likely to own. And macroeconomics like house prices and regional differences also affect the decision to own a home. So this is the choice structure. Graduates will choose whether they want to live with their parents at the very beginning. If they choose to leave their parental home, they will have two options. They will choose to own a house or rent a house. And this pie chart shows the percentage of their decisions. And in order to the model type by Probit model is suitable for this choice structure. I also test for other models like multinomial logic model and regression even, but I think Probit model performs slightly better than the others. The variable I use are age, gender, and ethnicity, years to arrive in the UK, and employment status and income region. I test the effect of these variables on home ownership. I use labor force survey, the data from labor force survey. And this picture shows that earning have very little effects on home ownership of young graduates. This is the net monthly income. Like this picture shows that if you are earning £2,000 a month, if your income increased to 3,000, the probability of your home ownership only increased around less than 5%. So generally, it illustrates that earning doesn't matter in home ownership. That's probably mean why is this? The reason could be because the house prices is just too high. No matter you are earning 2,000 or 3,000 a month, it doesn't matter because you cannot get onto the housing ladder. And they also study reveals that today people who are renting or paying their mortgage back are paying the same amount of money on housing every month. Like for example, if you live in London, the monthly rent could be something like £1,000. However, if you buy a house, if you are paying a mortgage, you might also paying something like £1,000. So in this case, more people want to own a house, but they cannot. They didn't. Why? Because they do not have enough deposit for their first home. And so here comes the conclusion. In this presentation, I show that young graduates take an important role in urban economic growth. And housing affordability affects a great proportion of young graduates, especially those who locate in the south or in London, where house prices are high. And the last point is the increase in income does not have a significant effect on home ownership. So if government want to help improve the housing affordability of young graduates, it is more important to take policies on housing supply or to decrease housing prices instead of increase income. Thank you very much.